All right, so hello everyone. Thanks for tuning in. My name is Tim. I'm a software developer at SAP and one of the Gardener contributors. And I'm happy to show you some security features that we introduced in the releases 1.11, 12, and 13. And yeah, in this presentation and in a demo, I want to show you the potential attack vectors and the countermeasures we have in place right now. Okay, so let me start with a simple cluster overview that we have in our Gardener environments, also as a little recap. So we have a garden cluster, which is a Kubernetes cluster, and inside we have on the left side a Kubernetes API server, and for the Gardener resources, we have the Gardener API server, which is an extension API server. And also in the Garden cluster, we have different controllers and webhooks. So for example, the controllers that come from the Kubernetes controller manager, and also controllers from the Gardener controller manager. And as I said, other webhooks that contact the API servers, request resources, post resources, update resources. So on a constant basis, more or less. So this is a simple view of the garden cluster, also because it's only necessary to show it in a simple way here. And we also have the seed clusters, of course, with the gardenlets inside in a productive setup, I would say. Always the gardenlets or one gardenlet per seed cluster. And of course, the gardenlet also requests updates, posts resources, via the API servers in the garden cluster on a constant basis. And of course, all these controllers and components, they do not only request or update resources, but they also, of course, they load all these resources into their memory. They have local caches, they watch the resources, all that stuff. So this is the cluster setup, more or less. And on the left side, of course, very important are our users. So the users, they request eventually a shoot cluster by either using the dashboard or by using kube control and creating a shoot cluster, and or generally put user-facing resources, not only shoot clusters, but also secret bindings, secrets, service accounts, everything that is permitted by users in the garden cluster for example, in a project namespace, or mostly in a project namespace. And we do not only have users, but we also have maybe users write their own controllers, write their own robots, which do that in an automatic fashion. So contacting and talking to the API server. So that's the general setup that we have for Gardener. And now I want to show you one denial of service scenario. So I have two prepared for this session, and let me start with the first one. So yes, as I said, we have this basic setup I just showed you. And now what happens if you prepare a few resources, for example, a shoot cluster resource, which is of course only Gardener related, and you artificially extend these resources. So you blow up the resource by putting a lot of annotations inside. Why do I say annotations? Well, it's the easiest way to blow up such a resource. You can have an annotation value of 256 kilobyte at max. And of course, if you put a lot of annotation values, the size will eventually grow. But not only for Gardener related resources, you can also take the same example for Kubernetes native resources like secrets. You can also artificially blow these resources up with annotations so that they will get really, really big, will become really, really big. So what's the problem with all of that? Let's imagine you have prepared a few of these big resources and you apply them, not only one, but also a bunch of them. And as I said, on the right side, in the garden cluster, as well as in the seed cluster, we have controllers and webhooks loading these resources into their local memory. And what you then suddenly realize, or the potential attack vector, is that these controllers or components, programs, will eventually face out of memory issues. So that can happen for the Gardener Controller Manager, for example. It can happen for the Cube Controller Manager, but of course also for the Gardenlets. And this is actually where the denial of service happens. You might can say, okay, we have different scalability options in place, also automatic ones like the vertical pot autoscaler. But of course, these features, they have all their limits, and we don't want to scale infinitely just because someone tries to DOS our system. Okay, so that's the potential attack vector. So if you have a Gardener setup with many users, then I would say the more likely it is to have such an attack vector because of malicious code, an attacker, or something like that. But it really depends on your setup, on the users you let your system, or that can access your system. As I said, it's only a potential attack vector, but we still wanted to have a measurement to prevent such attacks. So, and I would say quite easy but also effective countermeasure is to, let's say you apply these resources again. They are sent to the API server, and the API server sends it to another component called the Gardener Admission Controller. And this Gardener Admission Controller is a validating webhook configuration. So it has an endpoint to validate the incoming requests when it comes to their size. So it has a configuration, which is landscape or use case dependent. So you can configure these values yourself. Here in this example, you can, I put a configuration that we want to allow shoots and plants, and the maximum size of these resources are 100K. And for secrets, so you can also, of course, do that for other resources like Kubernetes native resources, not only for Gardener resources, we allow a maximum size of 10K. Yeah, with this configuration, the Gardener Admission Controller checks the incoming request. And I have to say, the request is only checked when it comes to the request length that comes into the Gardener Admission Controller. So this is not the eventual size or the eventual size of the resource in the etcd cluster. So don't be confused by that. But you have to consider this when you come up with these numbers, because these the request itself is most probably bigger than the size persisted in the etcd, or also the size that is necessary for the controllers to load these resources into their memory. But still, it's a nice way to validate these request sizes. Okay, so the request comes in. And the Gardener Admission Controller sends back the validation result. And eventually, since this is too big in this scenario, it gets a 400 and the request is denied. So that's the feature, the security feature to prevent the first scenario of DOS. I also want to show you that in a short demo. We have the admission controller configuration for the Gardener Admission Controller. So it has several other components inside, but we only want to concentrate on the resource size validation at the moment. So you have the resource admission configuration section, and here you can define the limits for each resource that you want to apply. So all this configuration is more or less, it looks really similar to the configuration you have for IREC roles. So it should be quite intuitive to maintain these values for you. Yeah, I put here the same values I had in the presentation. So 100K for shoots and plants and a 10K for secrets. Then we have a unrestricted subjects section, and this is a very important section. So because the feature itself is in the first place meant to protect your system from malicious requests coming from outside. But there is, yeah, when you post or when the user posts requests, of course, the resource itself can grow until a certain limit. And yeah, the Gardener itself has also, of course, components in place like the Gardenlet and posts updates to the very same resource. So for example, to a shoot cluster resource, which also the user uses. And we don't want to lock out our own components, of course. And yeah, with the unrestricted subjects, you can yeah, exclude certain groups from these validations. I think it's also yeah, quite reasonable to add your SRE groups, for example, or your admins to these unrestricted subjects. So in case anything goes wrong in the system, the SREs, the operators, still have the possibility to clean up something, yeah, to solve the situation. So also be careful when you define these groups. So for example, in this example, we say that our gardenlets are yeah, excluded from the checks. And yeah, last but not least, we have an operation mode. So we offer two modes, log and block. So the log mode is more or less an audit mode. When you start using that feature, we recommend you to begin with the log mode, which means you can set up certain values which seem reasonable to you. Let the validation run in the log mode for certain weeks or days, observe the logs in the admission controller, and in case there are no logs that something has potentially or will potentially be blocked, then you can still, or then you can eventually turn on the block mode, which means that the request will finally be blocked by the admission controller. So let me start the admission controller. So I prepared already a secret for this demo. I put in some, yeah, some annotations like I had in the screenshot. And move this window here. So, okay, and now let's have a look again. We say we want to at max allow secrets of which have a size of 10 kilobytes, and we run in the log mode. So the secret was created, but when I look at the logs, then I see that the request, let me increase the size a little bit, that the request will be denied in blocking mode. So this is a hint for you as an admin coming up with these values that your restriction is too low, or you have to contact your users and clarify with them, was that a valid request from your side? What do you want to do? Yeah, something like that. But you see that the size, the request here is given in bytes, and the max allowed is 10K. And you also can see the name of the secret that was requested or should be created, and the namespace also. So yeah, very nice way for you to find out these values. And of course, if you turn on the block mode, start it again. Then the request or the creation request is finally blocked, also telling the user that the size exceeds the max allowed configuration. Something interesting is, and that's what I said, so the Kubernetes API server sends the whole request to the validating webhook. And if you do an apply, of course, the resource that is sent to the webhook is extended by that last applied configuration in the annotations, which depending on the size of your secret, will additionally let your secret grow. So if you choose to kube control create the secret, it will finally work because the annotation is not there. So this is really what you have to keep in mind when it comes to configuring these values, how the mechanism works in the background. So really the whole resource is sent to the validating webhook here. So please keep that in mind. Okay, so that was the demo for the first scenario. Let me continue with the second scenario. Yeah, so scenario number 2, also denial of service, of course. So the scenario number 2 is related to resource flooding. So in the first one we had, it was more related to each resource size, and now it's really the numbers of resources we send to the API service. So you not only have one shoot clusters, but a lot of shoot clusters, and now you're hammering really the API server, and you put it under stress. And what you will probably also then notice is either also depending on the worker nodes or the worker sizes you have for your different controllers, you either experience also out of memory issues or some performance issues overall because the workers are busy with reconciling all the different resources that were sent to the API service, which makes it slow for the really important clusters in your landscapes. So as I said, it's really a performance issue more or less. Okay, so that is the second. And then we did a little bit of research in the Garden cluster and found these Kubernetes resource quotas. And this is a built-in Kubernetes feature, and the resource quota allow you to specify a maximum amount of resources that are allowed in a certain namespace. So yeah, actually exactly the thing we want to have to prevent such an attack vector or such an attack. And here a little example, you can do a kube control describe quota, and then you see different quota configuration depending on the namespace you're in and the configuration, of course. And one of the features is that you can restrict the overall number of elements that can be posted to your cluster, or that can be created in your cluster. As I said here in this example, it's related to the pods. So you have a hard limit of 10 pods, and at the moment there's only one pod in the namespace. And what if we could also use that for our Gardener related resources? For example, for shoots, secret bindings, terminals, more or less every, not only Kubernetes native resources, but also Gardener resources, which are user-facing resources, like these ones. So after a little bit of research, we found out that this built-in feature can actually be can't be reused easily because there's some hard dependency to the Kubernetes API server, and it is not out of the box transferable to our extension API server. But we still, of course, so one of the Gardener goals, I would say, is also to stick to the Kubernetes defaults and stick to stay in the Kubernetes world. Why not reusing a feature that is already there and not reinventing the wheel? And that's what we did. So we opened a PR in Kubernetes, and this PR, which will be part of Kubernetes 1.20. It finally allows to also enable these resource quotas for any kind of extension API servers like the Gardener API server. And in the meantime, because we didn't want to wait until 1.20 is out or is released from Kubernetes, from the Kubernetes community, we forked the code but only temporarily, of course. So once we update or upgrade to 1.20, we'll eventually get rid of that local fork in the Gardener API server and can use the native the native code from Kubernetes. But just to mention, it's really a Kubernetes supported feature eventually. So let me, I don't want to say thank you right now, but I just want to show you also a little demo. We have enough time. So okay. What we can do is we can, now I want to show you that I don't have any resource quotas at all. So we can get three. So KA is an alias for our namespaces here. Sorry, I'm just used to use that out of the box. Okay, so I don't have any resource quotas at all. What I can do right now is I have two projects. I have a dev project I usually use for developing, of course, and as the name says. And I have a thru project that I created for today, just for demo purposes. So for example, let's say the thru project is a customer-facing project, and I want to restrict or apply the quotas here. So what you of course, can do is you can create the resource quotas yourself for every namespace. So for example, it's as easy as saying, okay, I want to create a quota. The quota is named test. And I want to configure the quota with a hard count of 1,000 shoot clusters for the namespace foo. And if I then describe the quota, it says, okay, I have this quota configured. Currently, there are 0 shoots in the namespace, and the hard count is 1K. So that would be one possibility, of course, but it's not really convenient, especially if you have a landscape where many projects are created on a daily basis. Then you don't want to create the quotas yourself every time, right? So let me delete that again. And so in the latest Gardener release in 1.13 there is a extension for the project controller, and this one allows you to create or let the project controller create such resource quotas automatically for you. So this one is in the controller manager configuration. It's it's related to the project name, to the project controller. And there's a specific quota section where you can put different configuration inside. So in this case, I have two configuration or two resource quotas I'd like the project controller to create in the namespaces, in the project namespaces. And the one is a resource quota with very low limits, I would say, or very low hard counts. I only want to apply these quotas to certain projects. So in this case, I said, okay, if the project has the label purpose trial, I want the project controller to apply these resource quotas. And for the rest, it should just apply a higher resource quota definition, like 100 secrets, 20 shoots, 10 secret bindings, something like that. So that gives you the possibility to let Gardener handle this quota for you. And if I start the controller manager with that configuration, then the projects are reconciled. Sorry, I can get rid of that right now. Okay. Let me describe the quota again. And now it says I have a quota in the project namespace. The quota is always named Gardener. So in case there, if there were already a quota, it wouldn't, if there had been a quota before, it wouldn't have overwritten it. So be aware that if there's a match with the name, the one that is always already there is the effective one, and it won't get overwritten. So, and this is exactly the quota that we defined for for our trial namespace or our trial project, while when I look at the quota in my development namespace, I have the higher quotas applied here. All right, I guess that's pretty much it from my side. Gonna open it up for questions or hand over to Pavel. Thank you.
One thing to note, especially if you're upgrading to 1.18 for Gardener seed clusters, for Gardener clusters, is that there is a new manage field in the metadata of every single resource. So you should be aware that in some cases you might need to increase the request size, because every single Kubernetes resource will get like a resource bump because of this new field there.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. So it's pretty much related to also the last applied configuration I just showed, right? So it's really the whole resource that is sent to the validating webhook. So you should really be aware also what limits apply here. And as Martin said, if you change to 1.18, there will be more fields in the resource, which also let your resources grow. Yeah. Thank you, Martin.
Just one question. My question was exactly, so these resource quotas, as a project administrator, I have to apply it in the seed nodes, as whether using the robot account, or is it, or who does that exactly?
No, so the resource quotas are applied in the garden cluster only. So it's meant to be applied in the project namespace. And so you can apply it either yourself or you let Gardener, which would be the Gardener controller manager, which applies the defined quota resources for you in these namespaces.
Okay. So do we have to open a ticket or something, or how does the process work out?
Well, I think the process in general really depends on the company that uses these kind of features. But I would say if you have, for example, a default quota for every project out there, then of course you need to have a process in place which allows the project owners to request certain certain exceptions. Which you would the same thing you have more or less also for the cloud providers. For example, in AWS, you also have a default quota for EC2 instances, for example. And once you exceed these quotas, you also have to request an increase or a change.
Basically, it's like a request that has to be created to increase the quota at your end, and then it will be accordingly adjusted.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay, understood. Yeah. Thanks.
Sure.
So I only wanted to mention I only wanted to mention that the Gardener team is doing continuous pen testing with external companies, and the trigger for this functionality was one of these pen tests. So thank you very much, Tim, for implementing this mitigation.
Absolutely.
Okay, Tim, I also like it. It's a great improvement, but I've also a question. Currently, you can set some hard limits for resources, but do you know if there are also some intents so that you can make it configurable over time, like 100 resources per hour for that, or some time limit like requests per second, or for that stuff? Because I mean, this would be also a nice improvement. So if we can adapt it to that use case, so.
Okay, so you wanted to apply some kind of time window, but which will eventually...
Exactly. So if you have an automated setup and you want to create like 50 shoots per hour, so you maybe don't want to set a hard limit or somehow prevent some misuse.
Yeah, so frankly, I haven't thought about that feature, and I didn't read about it either. So maybe something we can come up with, some yeah, I don't know if there's already something in place from Kubernetes. I don't think so. So yeah, not at the moment, but interesting idea, definitely.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah, maybe on that issue, indeed, I probably think that this needs to go into the admission controller or an additional control. You want a rate limit, you know, people might use controllers and might go via the API server and hit it too often. We're seeing this already, so that might be indeed a very interesting option to rate limit our customers.
Okay, cool. Thanks. I would propose we finish the call for today, a few minutes before the next round of meetings for everyone. And good evening to Brian. And have a great day, everyone. Have a good weekend and stay safe.